Dawn rose like a pale coin over the high desert, turning the sage and mesquite into a quilt of silver green. Elias Crowder rode the ridge the way he did every morning, keeping to the slow, steady rhythm that had become his only measure of time. The trail was familiar, fence posts leaning at odd angles, a strip of rusted wire singing when the wind pushed through, a wash where quail burst up in a startle of wings, and familiarity was a comfort that asked for nothing in return. He had built his life to be small and predictable. Small things didn't break as loudly. He carried the weight of 3 quiet years the way a man wears a worn coat, out of habit as much as need. Fever had entered his home like a hot wind and left it silent. Since then, the world had narrowed. He ate when the light was right, watered the cattle when the shadows moved, mended fences when the wire told him it was time. The sound of his own boots on the cabin floor was company enough. The desert, however, liked to remind a man that he was not the only one making plans. At first he thought it was a mirage, just a shimmer bending the horizon into a wavering line. The air often did that beyond the ridgeline, teasing a man with visions of water where there was none. But the shape did not fade or scatter. It persisted, stuttering forward in a way no trick of heat could manage. Elias slowed his mare and let the picture resolve. A boy, thin as a post, and moving with the stubborn half-steps of someone who had already fallen once and meant not to do it again. He guided the mare down off the ridge, gravel skittering under iron shoes. The closer he came, the sharper the details. The boy's face was scoured by sun and grit, lips white and split, a dented canteen knocking against his thigh with an empty, tinny rattle. There was something in the set of his shoulders that Elias recognized, a refusal born not of strength, but of having run out of other choices. "Easy," Elias said, because the boy's knees were beginning to fold. The word came out low and steady, a habit from years of calming, skittish horses. He slid an arm under the boy's chest and eased him to the ground rather than let the earth do the work. The boy's mouth formed the shape of a word before sound arrived. "Water." Elias unstrapped his canteen. The metal felt cool in his palm from the shade of his coat. He tilted it carefully. The boy drank too quickly at first, coughing against the sting of the first swallow, then learned the pace. A small discipline that meant the difference between relief and regret in a place like this. Up close, the boy looked no older than 12. Dust had settled into the creases at the corners of his eyes, making him seem older for a moment, then very young when he blinked, and it shifted. There was a watchfulness there Elias knew well, the kind that comes to anyone who has learned to listen before speaking. "Where's your people?" Elias asked, because some questions couldn't wait. The answer was in the boy's eyes before it reached his mouth. Gone. The single syllable landed without fuss and without drama, and it was somehow heavier for that. "Name's Samuel," the boy managed after another measured sip. "Sam." Elias nodded once. Names mattered. They kept a person from being swallowed by the land. He lifted the boy to the mare with a practiced motion, as if he had done this all his life. The saddle creaked, leather complaining softly in the morning cool. Elias set a steady pace toward the cabin, letting the horse choose the ground. The trail dipped through a sandy arroyo and climbed again into a long, slow grade. The smell of creosote, warmed by the first true heat of the day, rose like a memory after rain. His cabin sat on a shelf of ground, tucked against low rock, weathered boards gone grey and honest with age. A small pen held a handful of cattle nosing at their trough, the waterline lower than he liked but not yet worrisome. Elias felt the tiny pinch of that thought and let it pass. Worry was a tool you used sparingly. Inside, the light was gentle, filtered through unwashed window panes. He dipped a tin cup into the water barrel. The clean sound of liquid against metal filled the room, intimate as a whispered prayer. He handed the cup to Sam and watched the boy drink with the same care he'd show a wounded animal, ready to steady, ready to wait. The boy's story came in pieces, not because he was holding it back, but because the telling took energy he did not have to spare. A father who worked the mine, a death that sounded as quick as a closed door, a foreman who found it easier to send a child away than to slow a shift, a town called Dry Creek, its well gone to stone weeks ago, its streets tighter with each empty bucket. Dry Creek. The name lived at the edge of Elias's mind like a distant bell. He had ridden through often enough in better years to remember the tilt of its false fronts and the way laughter could carry down its single street on a Saturday evening. He also remembered what the place had taken from him, the last stroll down that same street with a small hand in his, the bright scarf at his wife's throat. Memory did not arrive as pictures so much as sensations, the weight of a child against his chest, the lemon soap his wife liked, the slow hush of a fevered room when the world goes careful. He told himself, the way practical men do, that he would take the boy back in the morning and find a solution that did not reach beyond his fences. There were women in town who took in washing and orphans. There were men who counted charity as part of their tally with the Lord. The town found ways, even when it had nothing better than hard ground and stubbornness to work with. But as the day thinned and the sky turned the color of old copper, Elias found the boy on the porch, his legs drawn up, his gaze fixed on the wavering line of the horizon. The desert had cooled some, giving the wind a cleaner edge. Coyotes stitched the first faint notes of evening into the distance. Sam's shoulders rose and fell with quiet, even breaths, but his eyes did not soften. "It's all gone," the boy said at last, voice barely above the hush of sand moving against the steps. It wasn't complaint or fear so much as inventory, like a hand counting out what remained and finding the pile short. The well, the creek, everything. Elias stood in the doorway a long moment. He felt, not for the first time, how silence can have different shapes. The one between him and the boy was a bridge, not a wall. He stepped onto the porch and sat on the top step, leaving a respectful span of wood between them. The stars began to appear, sharp, unblinking points that made a man feel both anchored and very small. There were reasons a well ran dry. The earth shifted, springs moved. A new cut-up stream changed the flow. But there were other reasons too, ones that required hands and decisions. He thought of the cattlemen's syndicates that had grown bold since the rail lines bit deeper into the territory, of water rights spoken about in careful voices, as if naming them too plainly might make them vanish. He thought of men who saw scarcity as an opportunity. Inside the cabin, a picture frame faced down on a shelf. It had been that way a long time. Elias did not reach to turn it over. Instead, he studied the dark, where the desert fell away from his porch, and tried to listen the way a man listens at a door before he opens it. Morning would bring choices. The nearest of them was simple: take the boy back to town and do what mercy required. But there was a part of him, quiet, inconvenient, that recognized how quickly mercy can become responsibility. He did not invite that thought in. He only acknowledged it the way you nod to a neighbor at a distance. When the wind shifted, he could almost taste dust from the direction of Dry Creek, dry as flour on the tongue. He imagined the stone ring of the town well, the rope frayed where too many rough hands had worked it, the empty bucket rolling against old boards. A place can go thirsty, he thought, even when its people still talk and trade and sweep their stoops. Thirst shows itself in other ways first. Short tempers, wary eyes, doors closing a little faster. Sam's head dipped, then settled against the post with the boneless ease of a child who has outrun the day. Elias stood and eased a blanket over the boy's shoulders, careful not to wake him. The mare shifted in her pen and blew a soft breath that clouded the cooling air. He watched the horizon a while longer, until the line between earth and sky blurred into a single dark band. Then he made the kind of decision that doesn't announce itself with words. At first light, he would ride toward Dry Creek. He told himself it was to see the boy safely delivered, to put him into hands better practiced at kindness than his own. But the thought did not sit alone. It had company now, questions he hadn't meant to ask, and a thin, persistent thread of unease pulling from town to his doorstep like a line in the dust. When he finally closed the door against the night, the house did not feel as empty as it had the evening before. And somewhere between the stove and the quiet shelf with the face-down frame, Elias understood that the small life he had built could not remain untouched by whatever waited where the road dipped toward Dry Creek. The valley narrowed as Elias rode toward Dry Creek, the morning sun sharpening every ridge and shadow until the land looked carved from brass. Sam sat in front of him on the mare, small enough that Elias could feel each shallow breath the boy drew. They had spoken little since leaving the cabin. Words seemed too heavy for the distance they needed to cover. Dry Creek revealed itself gradually, a smear of pale dust rising from the wind's work. Then the low outlines of buildings slumped along a single street. Even from half a mile away, the place felt changed. Elias remembered it as busy enough on market days, with wagons and riders trading shouts, the metallic ring of a blacksmith's hammer carrying far. Now there was nothing but a stillness that made the air feel thinner. As they entered the main street, the mare's hooves thudded softly against packed earth. Windows were shuttered, doors cracked only wide enough for a watchful eye. A faded sign for the general store swung on a tired chain, the squeak cutting through the quiet. Sam's head turned in small, quick motions, taking in faces that appeared for a moment between curtains, then vanished again. They had not yet reached the center when movement broke the stillness. 3 men stepped off the general store porch. The first was broad across the chest, leather apron stained from years of handling crates and barrels. The others carried the kind of weariness that came from too many sun-baked hours, doing work they didn't choose. Elias slowed the mare, The men didn't shout, but the weight in their expressions was louder than any voice. One of them moved towards Sam with a quickness that made the boy tense. A hand clamped on his arm, pulling him from the saddle before Elias had both feet on the ground. He caught the boy before he stumbled, steadying him with one hand, while his other rested near the canteen at his belt. The men were close now, their words low, the rhythm of them sharp. Accusation. Elias didn't need to hear the details to know its shape. Sam's gaze was fixed on the ground, the angle of his jaw rigid. Elias shifted just enough to place himself between the boy and the storekeeper. The sun angled low enough to throw their shadows long across the street, thin lines reaching toward the well at the town's center. The tension hung there, silent, unbroken, until one of the men stepped back with a muttered warning. They retreated, but their eyes promised the matter was unfinished. He lifted Sam back into the saddle without a word, and they rode on. The center of town came into view, and with it, the well. Elias remembered it as the place where neighbors met, where buckets splashed, and the air smelled faintly of cold stone and wet rope. Now it was nothing but a hollow ring of dry rock, its bucket abandoned and rope frayed from disuse. No sound came from it, not even the echo of wind. He let the mare pause there, feeling the weight of what was missing. Wells didn't simply go dry without cause. Springs shifted sometimes, yes, but this felt different, purposeful. When they turned toward the far end of town, Elias felt the eyes on him again, some hidden in shadows, some watching openly from doorways. Not curiosity, not welcome, something tighter, measuring. By the time they reached the edge of Dry Creek, the air behind them seemed heavier than the air ahead. He did not look back, but he knew enough about the way trouble moved to sense that this was only the first step into something deeper. They left the last buildings of Dry Creek behind, the mare's pace unhurried, her tail flicking against flies. The road bent along a shallow ridge, giving Elias a final glimpse of the town. From this distance, it looked harmless, just another cluster of weathered wood clinging to the desert's edge. But the image wouldn't settle right in his mind. He carried away the memory of shuttered windows and eyes that didn't linger, as if the town itself feared to be caught looking too closely at its own reflection. Sam hadn't spoken since the well. He sat straight in the saddle, hands resting in his lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Elias could sense the weight in the boy's silence. It wasn't stubbornness, it was something heavier, as if speaking might draw attention from a place neither of them could see. By mid-morning, the heat pressed down like a hand. The mare's breath grew heavier, and Elias reined her toward a stand of mesquite for shade. They dismounted. Sam crouched near a flat stone, tracing idle lines in the dust with a twig, his movements slow, deliberate. Elias loosened the saddle cinch and checked the canteen. The water inside sloshed low, enough for them to reach home, not enough for waste. He watched the boy from the corner of his eye. Sam's face was still pale under its sunburn, the set of his mouth guarded. Elias knew that look. It was the one a man wore when he had seen something he didn't know how to name out loud. They rode on. The land opened wide, broken only by low ridges of sandstone that glowed red under the sun. Ahead, a trail of dust rose in a thin column, wheels on dry ground. Elias slowed the mare and shifted his weight in the saddle, listening. The sound reached them faintly, the rhythmic creak of axles, the jolt of harness chains. They moved off the road, guiding the mare behind a slope where scrub and rock offered cover. From there, Elias saw them. 2 wagons, each drawn by a pair of mules, moving north away from town. The men driving them sat stiff, heads forward, the way men do when they don't want to invite questions. The bed of each wagon was stacked with barrels, water barrels. The sight pressed an unease deeper into Elias's chest. Dry Creek's well lay hollow, yet water was leaving in the back of wagons. The tracks they left carved a clean line into the desert, heading toward the far edge of the ridge. Toward ranch land Elias knew well enough to guess the owner. When the wagons vanished from sight, he guided the mare back onto the trail. Sam's voice came at last, quiet but certain. "They've been doing that at night too." Elias looked down at the boy. Sam's eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, not on him. The words had been waiting, maybe since the moment he'd found him in the desert. Neither of them spoke again until the cabin came into view. Elias unsaddled the mare, set her loose in the pen, and filled a small tin for her to drink. Inside, the air was cooler, shadows lying still across the floor. He poured water for Sam and sat opposite him at the table. He didn't ask the questions crowding his mind, not yet. The boy was here now, safe enough for the moment. But as the wind shifted outside, carrying the faint tang of dust and something older, stone left dry too long, Elias knew safety was the smallest part of what the coming days would require. The wagons had left a trail in more ways than one. The night settled over the desert without ceremony, slipping into the spaces between rock and scrub until the world felt smaller. Elias sat on the porch, elbows resting on his knees, watching the last pale smear of daylight fade from the horizon. Sam was inside, the faint sound of him shifting under a blanket marking the only movement in the cabin. In the quiet, Elias's thoughts drifted to the wagons. He could see them again in his mind, barrels stacked under the open sun, mules steady on the trail, the drivers keeping their faces fixed ahead. The image gnawed at him, and with it came the name that fit too neatly: Silas Boone. Boone had the kind of wealth that made a man untouchable in most towns. His ranch sprawled across the northern flats, close enough to the river to keep his stock watered even in lean years. He owned more cattle than most folks could count, and if there was a way to profit from someone else's misfortune, Boone found it. Elias had seen that kind before. Men like Boone didn't cause droughts, they used them. By morning, the air was dry enough to chap the inside of his nose with each breath. He saddled the mare and left Sam at the cabin, telling him only to stay close. The trail to town was quiet, the only sound the steady creak of leather and the rasp of wind across brittle grass. He found the sheriff outside his office, leaning back in a chair tilted against the wall. The man's badge caught the light, but his eyes stayed narrow and tired. Elias dismounted, the sheriff's gaze following him like a shadow. The conversation was short. Elias mentioned the wagons, the barrels, the empty well. The sheriff's jaw moved as though chewing over the words, but there was no weight in his reply. A shrug, a suggestion that Elias keep to his own affairs, and then the faintest curve of a warning smile, polite on the surface, but with enough steel underneath to make the meaning plain. Walking back to his horse, Elias felt the tightness in his chest shift from unease to certainty. Boone's reach went further than the ranch fence lines. Whatever was happening to Dry Creek wasn't just about water, it was about who controlled it. The ride home was slow. He took the long way, keeping to the edges of the ridges, scanning for the trail the wagons had taken. By late afternoon, he found it, a narrow cut in the earth leading away from town, marked by the scuff of hooves and the deep grooves of wheels. It followed the land north, disappearing behind a low rise. That night, Sam asked no questions, but Elias could tell the boy was waiting for something. An answer, a plan, maybe even a promise. Elias didn't offer any of those, not yet. He had learned the cost of moving too soon. Still, as the wind pushed against the cabin walls and the stars came out hard and cold, he knew the stillness between them wouldn't last. Some things demanded motion, and he had the feeling Dry Creek was about to force his hand. The morning began with a sky the color of faded denim and a wind that smelled of old dust. Elias saddled the mare before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. Sam stood at the fence rail watching him work. The boy's quiet was different now, less from weariness, more from expectation. Elias could feel the question in it. When do we stop just watching? They rode into Dry Creek before the heat rose too high. The town was awake, but not in any way that felt natural. People moved quickly, keeping to their business. Conversations ended when strangers passed by. On the porch of the general store, a group of men spoke in low voices, their eyes fixed on the street. Elias dismounted in front of Clara Mayfield's saloon. The sign above the door hung crooked, paint flaking at the edges. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with the faint smell of coffee and the sharper trace of whiskey. Clara stood behind the counter, her hair pinned neatly despite the heat. She greeted him with a nod, her eyes flicking to Sam and back. Her words were few, but the meaning in them was clear enough. People were thirsty, tempers were short, and Boone's wagons were the only source of water most folks had left. Those who could pay stayed silent. Those who couldn't, well, they learned to keep their opinions quiet too. Elias took in the room as she spoke. A pair of ranch hands nursed coffee at a corner table, their shoulders hunched inward. A store clerk filled a canteen at a barrel in the corner, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to be challenged. The tension in the air was as tangible as heat from a forge. By the time they stepped back into the sunlight, Elias had seen enough to know the truth. Dry Creek was split in two. On one side were those willing to endure Boone's prices to keep their families fed and watered. On the other were the ones Boone had already pressed too far, people who might be ready to resist, but too few and too scattered to stand openly. On the walk back to the mare, Elias noticed Sam looking toward the center of town. The boy's gaze lingered on the dry well, the rope hanging limp against its stone lip. His jaw tightened. Elias didn't need to ask what he was thinking. It was written plain on his face. They left town without speaking to anyone else. The mare's slow, steady pace gave Elias time to weigh what he'd seen. Boone's grip on Dry Creek wasn't just about water, it was about fear, spreading it wide enough that no one dared step out of line. That kind of control didn't break on its own. It had to be pushed. The night came down in layers. First the dimming of the horizon, then the cooling of the air, and finally the weight of darkness settling over the desert like a worn blanket. Elias moved through the last of his chores without hurry, but with a kind of quiet purpose. The mare shifted under his hands as he adjusted her bridle, sensing the difference in him. Sam sat on the porch rail, legs swinging idly, though his eyes hadn't left Elias for some time. When Elias reached for the saddle, Sam straightened, his small frame silhouetted against the faint glow from the cabin window. No questions, no hesitation. He knew they were going somewhere that mattered. Elias didn't invite him, but he didn't tell him to stay behind either. They left without a lantern, letting the moon guide them. Its light was sharp and pale, throwing the land into silver ridges and black hollows. The air was dry enough to chap the lips in minutes, and the only sounds were the slow, deliberate thud of hooves and the faint rustle of night wind through the brush. Elias rode with his weight forward, eyes sweeping the land. He knew where the wagons had gone 2 nights before. The cut in the road leading north wasn't much more than a crease in the earth, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. He followed it now, the mare's ears pricked forward, catching noises too faint for him to hear yet. An hour passed before a sound floated to them, soft at first, almost part of the wind. It grew clearer, the creak of wooden axles, the muted jingle of harness chains. Elias drew the mare into the shadow of a sandstone rise and let her stand. The dust trail came into view first, pale against the dark, then the shapes of 2 wagons moving in single file. Each was drawn by a pair of mules, their hides catching the moonlight like worn leather. The men on the driver's benches sat stiff, eyes locked ahead, as though the act of looking anywhere else might invite trouble. In the beds of the wagons, the shapes of barrels were stacked tight, their rims catching thin silver edges of light. Elias waited until they passed, then nudged the mare forward, keeping well back. The trail bent toward a low ravine, its mouth half hidden by a spill of boulders and mesquite. The wagons vanished inside one at a time. He dismounted before following, motioning for Sam to do the same. They led the mare on foot, her hooves muffled by loose sand. From the shadows, Elias saw it, a narrow cleft in the rock, just wide enough for the wagons. Inside, the ground was darker, the air cooler, and then he caught it, the faint, unmistakable scent of fresh water. A spring. It wasn't large, but someone had worked it with care. A rough wooden trough guided the flow into open barrels. The water shimmered in the moonlight, cold and clear, running with the quiet persistence of something that had been doing so long before men found it. Boone's men moved with practiced efficiency, rolling full barrels toward the wagons, sealing each with a wooden plug before loading it. They worked without speaking, their silence as deliberate as their speed. Elias felt Sam shift beside him. The boy's breathing had changed, quicker now, carrying a tension that was almost trembling. Elias knew that mix of feelings, relief that the water still existed, and anger at seeing it taken. They stayed until the last barrel was loaded. The wagons turned and rolled out the way they had come, their wheels carving fresh grooves into the sand. Elias waited until the sound of them had faded into nothing before leading Sam back to the open desert. The ride home was long. The moon climbed higher, spilling its cold light over the land, but the desert seemed darker in Elias's mind. This was no accident of nature. Dry Creek's thirst had been engineered, measured out in barrels, and sold at a price set by one man. By the time they reached the cabin, the wind had picked up, rattling the dry branches near the fence. Elias unsaddled the mare in silence. Sam slipped inside without a word, but Elias stood outside a while longer, staring toward the north. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he understood one thing. The moment they'd seen that spring, they'd crossed a line, and lines in the desert had a way of turning into boundaries a man couldn't step back over. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt deceptively ordinary. The desert sun still climbed over the ridges each morning, cattle still wandered to the trough for their share, and the wind still carried that same dry whisper through the mesquite. But for Elias, everything had shifted. He could feel it in the way he moved, his eyes lingering a moment longer on the horizon, his ears searching for sounds beneath the wind, his mind replaying the image of that hidden spring and the barrels rolling away into the night. Sam began spending more time near him, shadowing his work without being asked. If Elias mended a section of fence, Sam fetched nails before he needed them. If Elias checked the cattle, Sam kept pace, learning to read the animals' movements and moods. The boy listened more than he spoke, his questions saved for when Elias least expected them, about the land, about the way the wind shifted before a storm, about how to tell if a rope would hold. Elias didn't think of it as teaching, not at first. It was simply the most natural way to fill the hours. But as the days passed, he began to see the shape of it. Sam was learning skills a boy didn't pick up in town. Skills that belonged to men who worked the land and knew how to hold it. One afternoon, while checking a distant section of fence, they came across the half-buried remains of a cattle skull, bleached white by years of sun. Sam knelt beside it, running his fingers over the cracks in the bone. He didn't say anything. But Elias understood the question behind his silence. "Drought'll do that," Elias said, his voice even. "Or bad water. Either way, it don't take long." Sam stood, brushing the dust from his hands. His face stayed still, but his eyes carried something Elias recognized, a quiet resolve. That evening, Clara Mayfield rode out from town. Elias spotted her before she reached the fence line, her horse moving at a steady lope, dust rising behind her. She dismounted without waiting for an invitation and tied her reins to the post. Clara had the look of someone who'd been carrying a truth too long, and tonight it had grown heavy enough to set down. Inside, over the low creak of the cabin's floorboards, she told him about her brother. Years back, he'd worked the freight lines and discovered Boone's men diverting water during another lean season. He'd tried to bring it to light, but Boone had ways of making trouble vanish. Her brother's death had been ruled an accident, a fall from a wagon, but Clara never believed it. She'd kept her distance from Boone since, but seeing the well run dry again had stirred something she couldn't ignore. Elias listened without interrupting, the weight of her words settling in the same place the memory of the spring had lodged. Before she left, Clara glanced toward Sam, who was sitting on the porch steps with a length of rope, practicing knots. "That boy's going to need more than just your fences to keep him safe," she said, her voice low. When the dust of her departure had settled, Elias remained standing at the fence, the evening light bleeding red across the desert. Sam looked up from his rope, waiting. "Tomorrow," Elias said at last, "we start riding farther." He didn't add why. Some things didn't need saying. The boy's slight nod was enough to tell him they understood the same thing. The time for just watching had passed. The morning broke with a sky so clear it looked polished, the air already carrying a thin heat that promised a long day. Elias saddled the mare while Sam filled their canteens, his small hands careful, deliberate. There was no talk of where they were going. Both understood it without speaking. Today was for proof, for finding the kind of evidence Boone couldn't hide behind his men or his money. They followed the northern trail until the land narrowed into a pass between two sandstone ridges. The wind moved differently there, funneled through the gap, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth from somewhere beyond. Elias slowed the mare, keeping to the shadows when he could. They weren't looking to be seen. By midday, they'd circled far enough east to look down on the hidden spring from a ridge. From above, the place was almost invisible, just a scatter of brush and a pale streak of stone, but Elias could see where the trough had been set, where the barrels waited to be filled. The stillness around it was unnatural, like a breath being held. They settled in to wait, knowing the wagons would come. But the desert had other plans. The wind shifted hard and sudden, carrying with it a taste of grit. In minutes, the horizon to the west turned the color of rust. The line rose higher, curling and breaking against the sky until it swallowed the sun. Elias didn't waste time. "Down!" he said, guiding Sam toward the shelter of a dry gully. The air thickened, the wind's howl building into something that made the ground feel unsteady. Sand hit them in waves, stinging exposed skin, filling the air with a fine, choking dust. The world vanished. Shapes dissolved into the storm. Sound dulled under the constant roar. Elias pulled his bandana over his mouth, keeping a hand on Sam's shoulder, feeling the boy press close to stay anchored. The sand found its way into everything: hair, clothes, the cracks in their skin. They moved by touch until Elias's boots struck wood. An old door, hanging crooked on its hinges, gave under his shove. They stumbled into the shadowed interior of what had once been a church. The air inside was still heavy with dust, but the walls cut the wind to a dull moan. It took a while before their breathing steadied. Sam sat on one of the warped pews, brushing grit from his hair. The place smelled of old wood and the faint tang of rust where nails had bled into the boards. Light leaked through cracks in the walls, drawing thin lines across the floor. Elias walked the length of the room, boots echoing faintly. He could almost hear the ghost of the place, voices singing under the timbered roof, the shuffle of boots on Sundays long gone. Now it was just the two of them, the storm outside, and the sense that they'd stepped into someone else's memory. Sam's voice finally broke the quiet. "What happens when the storm's over?" Elias looked at the narrow beams of light spilling across the floor. The question was bigger than Sam knew. "When it's over," he said, "we keep going." Outside, the wind howled like something that wasn't ready to let go. Inside they waited, knowing that time was running just as surely as the water in Dry Creek. The storm broke in the early hours, leaving behind a silence that felt almost foreign. Fine dust lay over everything inside the church, pews, floor, their clothes, like a pale shroud. Elias pushed the door open to a world washed of sharp edges. The light filtered through the lingering haze. They rode out slowly, the mare's hooves sinking into the softened ground where the storm had left drifts of sand. Every plant wore a thin coat of grit, and the desert smelled faintly of iron, as if the air itself had changed. The spring was empty when they reached it. No wagons, no men, only the faint impression of mule hooves pressed into damp soil. Elias crouched beside the trough, touching the wood, fresh. Boone's men had been here, but not during the storm. That meant they were working on their own schedule, one Elias hadn't yet cracked. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was high and the heat returned with it. Sam went to water the mare while Elias stepped inside, scanning the room with the habit of a man who expected change where there shouldn't be any. Nothing was out of place. Still, a weight settled in his chest, an instinct that didn't need proof to be trusted. The proof came the next day. Just after noon, a rider appeared at the far edge of the property. Boone's colors were on his vest, a dark strip of leather with the brand stitched into it. He didn't come closer than the fence, didn't call out. He just sat there, one hand resting on the horn of his saddle, watching the cabin with a calm that felt practiced. When he turned and rode off, Elias knew the message was already sent. Boone was aware of him, and that awareness carried a price. It didn't take long for the price to show. By evening, the trail north to Boone's ranch was blocked, not with a fence, but with men, 3 of them, leaning against posts, rifles in easy reach. They didn't move when Elias and Sam approached from a distance. One even raised a hand in what might have been a wave, but the shape of it was wrong, mocking instead of friendly. Elias didn't push closer. He turned the mare back toward the cabin, feeling Sam shift behind him. The boy didn't speak, but his small hands had tightened on the saddle's edge. That night, the desert felt smaller, as if Boone's reach had stretched across the open land and tightened around them. Elias sat at the table, the oil lamp burning low, and ran a thumb along the map spread before him. Roots, ridges, narrow cuts in the land. He searched for a path that didn't run through Boone's shadow. Sam watched from the doorway, his face lit in flickers. He didn't ask what they would do next. He didn't have to. Whatever came, Boone had made the first move, and Elias wasn't the kind of man to leave the last one in another's hands. The next morning broke under a sky the color of cold steel, the kind that made shadows look sharper. Elias was already saddled before the first line of sun cleared the ridge. Boone's move to block the trail had shifted things. Waiting wasn't an option anymore. If they couldn't go through the front, they'd find another way in. They left before most of Dry Creek stirred, cutting across the flats toward a low series of ridges. Elias knew these trails like the back of his own hand. He'd ridden them years ago, when life had other shapes and fewer regrets. They offered cover, twists in the land that kept you unseen until you wanted to be. Boone's ranch rose from the desert like its own small town, corrals stretching wide, outbuildings scattered in neat order, and the main house sitting high enough to see the land in all directions. From their vantage on the ridge, Elias studied the place, marking the steady movement of hands tending cattle and wagons being loaded. They waited until the ranch hands moved toward the southern pasture, leaving the main yard quieter. Elias led the mare down a narrow cut in the rock and approached from the rear, where an old freight shed stood apart from the other buildings. Sam moved ahead of him, small enough to slip between the boards where the wall had warped. Elias held back, scanning the yard, every muscle tuned to the silence. Inside, the air smelled of dust and cedar, with an undercurrent of something colder, metal and ink. Sam's voice came low from the shadows. Over here. Elias stepped inside. Against the far wall, a heavy desk sat under the dim light filtering through a high window. Drawers hung open, and on the desk lay rolled maps, a ledger with thick inked columns and a scatter of folded receipts. Sam stood beside them, his fingers tracing the edge of one map. Elias unrolled it, the paper cracking softly. It was the territory, ridges, riverbeds, wells, and marked in bold lines was a network of channels leading from springs, including the one they'd found, straight toward Boone's ranch. The ledger told the rest. Dates, amounts, buyers in towns far beyond Dry Creek, all recorded in Boone's hand. The numbers matched the barrels, and the barrels matched the stolen water. A shadow crossed the high window and Elias froze. A man's voice carried faintly from outside, close enough to catch only fragments. He set the map back down, meeting Sam's eyes. They slipped out the way they'd come, keeping low until the shed was behind them and the sound of voices faded. Only when they reached the cover of the ridge did Elias allow himself to breathe fully again. The proof was real. The theft wasn't rumor anymore. It was a plan written in Boone's own ink, and now that proof was theirs to carry. The desert wind rose behind them, carrying the faint scent of water from somewhere it didn't belong. They left before dawn, the air cold enough to bite through their coats. Elias had the ledger and maps wrapped in oilcloth, tied tight and tucked deep into his saddlebag. Sam rode behind him, his small hands steady on the back of the saddle, the boy's weight leaning with each turn in the trail. The road to the county seat was long, skirting ridges and dry washes before cutting across the open flats. Elias had chosen it for one reason. It kept them out of Boone's usual lines of travel. Still, he knew Boone wouldn't let them pass unchallenged. By mid-morning, the light was sharp, casting every rock's shadow long against the earth. The sound reached them first, a faint, uneven rhythm that didn't belong to the wind. Elias slowed the mare, listening. Hoofbeats, more than one set, closing from behind. When they crested the next rise, the trap revealed itself. Boone's men, 4 riders, waited in the shallow basin below, their horses restless in the sun. They sat too still, the kind of stillness that carried intent. Elias reined in, his eyes scanning the land for cover, none worth counting. The only way was forward, and forward meant going through them. The men spread out as they approached, closing the gap until the trail behind was gone. Words weren't traded. The message was already in their positioning. One rider's gaze lingered on Elias's saddlebag, and that was enough to confirm it. They knew exactly what he carried. From the east, another sound rose. Hoofbeats again, but faster this time. Elias turned his head just enough to see dust lifting along the far ridge. It wasn't Boone's men. 3 riders from Dry Creek came hard across the flat, Clara at the lead, her hat pulled low against the glare. Behind her were 2 ranchers Elias recognized, men who'd lost stock when the well first ran dry. They rode in close and fast, not breaking stride as they fell in beside him. The sight of the added numbers made Boone's men shift in their saddles. No one moved for the saddlebag now, but the tension stayed high, hanging in the air like a drawn bow. Clara's voice cut through the stillness. "We're riding to the county seat. You planning to block the law or just our way?" Silence stretched. One of Boone's men spat into the dust, then jerked his chin toward the trail. Slowly they pulled back, clearing a narrow lane between their horses. Elias nudged the mare forward, the group moving as one. He didn't look back, but he could feel the eyes on them, tracking until the distance and dust swallowed the view. By the time they reached the county seat in late afternoon, the weight in Elias's saddlebag felt heavier than water. The courthouse stood plain and tall, its stone walls holding the cool of the day. Inside, the judge's expression shifted as the maps and ledger were laid before him, each page a stone in the wall closing around Boone. Still, Elias knew that the paper alone wasn't the end. Boone wouldn't vanish quietly, and whatever came next, Dry Creek would have to stand as more than scattered voices. The ledger was proof, but proof was only the beginning. The judgment came down a week later. Word traveled faster than Elias expected. Boone's land along the northern flats seized. The springs returned to common use, his wagons barred from hauling water for profit. There was no scene, no public reckoning. Boone had money enough to vanish without offering the town the satisfaction of watching him leave. But the absence of his men on the streets of Dry Creek was proof enough that his hold had broken. The first water from the reopened well was muddy, pulled from deep where it had sat too long. By the 3rd day, it ran clean again. Elias stood with Sam at the stone ring, watching the bucket come up brimming, the sunlight catching the surface until it looked like a coin. People gathered in small knots around them, speaking in voices lighter than they had been in months. Children carried tin cups that sloshed as they ran. Ranch hands refilled their canteens without the weight of debt in every swallow. Life began to stretch again. Clara converted her saloon into a cafe, sunlight spilling through the wide windows each morning. The sound of chairs scraping wood replaced the low murmur of cautious talk. She smiled more now, but there was still a sharpness in her gaze, a habit earned from too many years watching the wrong men prosper. Elias found himself in town more often. At first it was to collect supplies or help with the repairs on the well, but as weeks passed he stayed longer, the distance between his cabin and the community feeling less like a separation and more like a choice he no longer needed to make. Sam grew into the space the town offered him. He ran errands for Clara, mended fences for the ranchers who'd once eyed him with suspicion, and carried water to the older folks whose hands had grown unsteady. Elias watched the boy move among them with a steadiness that hadn't been there before, a steadiness that came from belonging. One late afternoon, As the sun settled into the ridges, Elias stood on his porch with the adoption papers folded in his hand. The ink was still fresh, the county seal pressed deep into the page. Sam was inside, humming tunelessly as he worked at polishing the mare's saddle. Elias didn't call him out to say the words. There'd be time for that. Instead, he stepped into the cabin, set the papers on the table where the boy couldn't miss them, and poured 2 cups of coffee, one black, one just the way Sam liked it, more milk than coffee. When Sam looked up and saw the papers, the humming stopped. His eyes flicked to Elias's face, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then the boy's mouth curved into a slow, sure smile. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of water from the well. Dry Creek had been a place holding its breath for too long. Now, it exhaled, and Elias, for the first time in years, felt the air fill his lungs without weight.